Hi guys, welcome back to OCD Recovery's YouTube channel. Gemma here. I wanted to talk today a bit about the fear of death. So this is something that was super prominent for me. It can come from many different things. For me, I think a fear of missing out was the biggest one. I was really scared of leaving behind my daughter, leaving behind loved ones, just not getting to experience life, I think, in itself. The idea of dying and everything else just carrying on around me just felt completely intolerable. I would vividly imagine all the time what happened if I died and, how people would cope and what would happen to me as well, worrying about life after death. Of course, there's so much uncertainty surrounding that. And as people with OCD, we crave that certainty. So the fear of not knowing what happens after death can be super prominent, especially with like religious OCD and things as well. Am I going to hell? Of course, because with OCD, quite often people can feel like they're bad people. There's then that fear of going to hell or, living in purgatory or just not having that amazing afterlife that you hope to have. So I think with the fear of death, it's important to, first of all, work out why you're so scared of dying. I mean, no one's over the moon about it, of course. Even now, if you told me I was going to die tomorrow, I think I'd feel some anxiety and I think I'd be very upset to hear that I'm going to die. And I would feel bad about leaving loved ones. I would be upset. But I don't walk around with that fear unless something were to happen where I realized that I was going to die. Then I would be concerned about it. But for now, I'm very much in the mindset of it's going to happen. That there's no way out of it. Unfortunately, it's going to happen. And I can either live my life being scared and alert and on edge that something's going to happen, or I can just live my life and actually enjoy the time that I do have. Now, I know it sounds like that is such a simple way to think, but believe me, that took a lot of work for that to become my actual stance on death, because for many years, so fear of death was actually my first like big OCD fear. And it started when I was around 4 years old, and I would go to bed every night and I would cry and get my mum to reassure me that I wasn't going to die in my sleep. So I was absolutely terrified already at that point of dying. And then I think the next time I had a really big stint with fear of death was when maybe I had it a few times over the years, but it wasn't the most prominent in my like childhood, teen years. That was more ROCD, fear of losing control, things like that. It was probably when I was 16, when I fell pregnant with my daughter, that the fear of death really latched again because I was concerned for her safety and therefore concerned for my safety. So I would, we had like a log burner where I was living at the time, and I kept thinking that it was like letting off toxic fumes and it was going to kill me in my sleep. And then I started becoming really obsessed with like gas and things like that. Like I would always think I smelt gas anywhere I was, and that it was going to kill me. I was really concerned about like inhaling anything in the air that might be toxic. I had a real big thing about anything toxic at that time. And I would always like look up at the sky and I would see like little dots all the time because I was highly anemic. And I would think that meant that there was something wrong with my brain and that I was going to die from that. And then when I was in labour, I thought I was going to die then after I had her. That's when it ramped up massively. I mean, that was kind of overshadowed by other fears at that point. But that was still quite prominent. I think that's the fear of death is one that's kind of been with me for my whole life. My last really, really big relapse a few years back now, that was a fear of death, and that displayed with health OCD. But it can display in different ways. You can get kind of contamination fears that link to a fear of death. You can get religious fears that link to a fear of death. You can get health, harm. Like there's so many different themes that can come from a fear of death. But as we know, there aren't actually many core fears, probably 4 or 5 main core fears, and then everything else just kind of emanates from them. But with a fear of death, it's a tricky one to break down. And I always have this conversation with people because obviously you're looking at the best case scenario of that. And it's quite hard to think of what's the best case scenario if I die. But believe it or not, you can think of things for that. And it's not just about looking at the best case scenario of dying, but the best case scenario if your loved ones around you, if you were to die, if that's the fear that you have, or the best case scenario of what would happen. Let's say were you were killed in some horrible accident, and that accident resulted in something being changed because something was unsafe. Then it could potentially lead to you having saved other people. Now, I know it feels like a long shot sometimes when you're looking at these things, because it's like, well, the likelihood of that happening, but it's important for us to look at these best case scenarios as well as our worst case scenarios to try and create that balanced opinion. Looking at what the lives, I had to really look at like what would be the life of my daughter if I died. That was the main one for me, because I was so scared about leaving her. And in my head it was like, life over, ruined, she'll never recover, it's awful. So I would look at things like, well, what would happen if I died? Who would she live with? What would her life look like? What possible positive could she have in her life that she wouldn't have had if I'd been alive? I imagine she'd be a lot more empathetic towards people. I imagine she would form closer relationships with other people that she wouldn't have otherwise formed because she lived with me. She might go on to do something completely different with her life than she would have done with me. Like, there are so many positive potential outcomes to that situation, even though it doesn't feel like it, because in my head I was like, no, that's like game over. And then it was looking at evidence as well of, people that I know that have lost their parents, and, how they're still functioning. Yes, they're upset, of course, anyone would be losing a parent, especially one that you're close to, but life still went on for them. It didn't just end. I think a lot of the time we think if our worst case scenario happens, that's it, it's life over. Like, there's nothing else that can come from that. It's like the worst case and then the world goes boom, and that's not the case. Like, there is life after those worst case scenarios. I suppose not if you're dead, but for the other people that you would be concerned about, there would be life after that for them. And of course that could be for you, who knows. I'm not getting into a debate on life after death, because I have no idea what happens, and I'm quite happy that way. I used to really want to know what happened, and I used to be like, looking up articles of people that had like near-death experiences, and they said, oh, when it happened, I experienced, or people that have died particularly, like, they've died for a couple of minutes or something, and they're like, well, I saw a light. And I would look up articles like that to try and give myself that reassurance that, there is something after death, which means, but because for me the worst thing was the idea that there was just nothing, like, just there's just nothing, like one day you're here and one day you're gone, and that really, really bothered me. So what I had to do with that is I had to be careful that I wasn't doing any compulsions. Now, the compulsions will vary based on what your theme based off of the fear of death is. So for me, with health OCD, I was constantly checking symptoms. I was seeing specialists. I saw an MRI specialist because I thought I had a brain aneurysm. I called an ambulance a few times over panic attacks. I went to see my GP all the time, doctor. Sorry for anyone that's not British, you probably won't know what your GP is. Doctor. I went to go and see my doctor all the time, giving them like a breakdown of my symptoms. The thing is, my OCD was never satisfied with that. I would give them a breakdown of my symptoms. They would tell me, you're young, you're healthy, you're fine, go home. I would go home and go, oh my God, but I didn't tell them about that. Or I'd start experiencing a new symptom. And then I'd be, well, I need to tell them about this one now. So then I would go again, and the cycle would repeat. So with that, I really, really had to, first of all, break down my worst case scenario, which would be a fear of missing out, leaving my daughter, leaving my family, not having any experiences anymore. So looking at the beliefs behind that, but also cutting those compulsions, not going to the doctor. That was so hard for me. I was there all the time, constantly hooked up to an ECG machine where I thought I was having heart attacks. I had like a numb sensation in my left arm for months. I didn't feel my left arm for months because it was constantly mimicking that heart attack sensation for me because I was so terrified of it. I wasn't driving because every time I got in the car, I would get a bit of a panic sensation that would feel like a heart attack. And then I would think, I'm going to have a heart attack and die at the wheel. I'm going to then kill myself. I'm going to kill someone else. So yeah, really cutting those compulsions out, those avoidance behaviors. So going back to driving, going back to work, because at one point I wasn't even going to work. I was laying on my mum's sofa saying I can't move my head too far because my aneurysm will burst. You know, it was really severe. That one really got me. That one really got me. So cutting those compulsions, forcing yourself into doing things that you really don't want to do, you know, exposure work around that, and then of course breaking down those beliefs. So yeah, I hope this has been helpful for you guys. If you've got any questions, pop them in the comments below, and I will see you on the next video.